introduction. Really delighted to welcome Leor Roseman from Imperial College London, where you are research. Is that right?
Research, yeah. Research, postdoc.
Postdoc, yeah. Here today we're going to talk about your paper on ayahuasca and use in Israeli Palestinian communities, and maybe you can just put some other work. So and Leor's going to do a better introduction of himself. Sorry. Yeah, that's all right. All right.
Try sitting. So Leor Roseman from Imperial College. Try to introduce myself. I've been in the lab for 9 years in the Center for Psychedelic Research, so doing my master's, PhD, postdoc over there. Most of my research started like neuroscience, and then moved into like studying therapy and mediators, psychological mediators of psychedelic therapy. But then a lot of my personal experiences were in groups, and I always had some with like amazing people from Devon. So I guess what I'm presenting here is also my integration of processes that relates to this region. And I kind of wanted to study group social dynamics and kind of relational aspects of psychedelic use. Obviously, it's hard to bring into the lab groups of people and do ceremonies or rituals and play music together in the lab. So kind of a lot of the studies moved out to the lab, doing observational research. And I was seeking a relational problem. So there's always needs something to fix with psychedelics. So obviously a relational problem is war, conflict, and I'm Israeli. So I decided to study ayahuasca-induced in groups of Israelis and Palestinians. And I'm going to present this. And it's obviously like a complex topic. There's already 2 papers that published on the topic. And they're complex because there's no easy way of discussing these things. So I'm going to present, but if what I'm saying is if I'm not clear, please slow me down, stop me, and ask questions during the presentation. So I'll start with the story of Rukaya. Rukaya is a Palestinian woman who lives in Israel. And she participated, she lives in Israel for many years. She's kind of already assimilated to Israeli society. Her daughter studies in a Jewish school, although she's Muslim. She studies in a Jewish school, but her daughter is also very assimilated to Israeli society. And Rukaya is in a ceremony in Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is like the holiest day for Jewish people. It's the day of preparation, the day of fasting, of like reflecting on the past and what we want to change. And she's in that ceremony, and suddenly in the ceremony with ayahuasca and a group of mainly Jewish Israelis, she suddenly has a strong vision of her daughter being lost into this kind of darkness, into the abyss. At the moment, her daughter was already kind of considering to join the Israeli army. So she kind of feels that it's almost she's losing her daughter from her heritage, from her background, and she kind of pulls her daughter from the darkness. And when she managed to pull her, suddenly she has a strong vision, very conflictual of war, very almost apocalyptic. So it's a very strong vision of intergenerational war from past generations, for Jewish people as well, continuing to Israel-Palestine, continuing to the future. And in that vision, she sees mothers who sacrifice their children for war. She sees the bleeding land. I think that's from So she sees the bleeding land. She feels the pain of the land in the moment. And it's very painful in the moment vision for her. So it's full of agony. It kind of triggers also anger in her. And she says that in the moment of having this revelation, this vision, she suddenly almost automatically mediates or channels a song to the rest of the group. And she sings the opening paragraph of the Quran. But she sings it with like strong confidence and also with anger and also with like almost judgment or political message that she wants to convey to the Jewish people in the ceremony, that Yom Kippur is not just about fasting, it's also political reparation that is
most countries in the world have said, if you're going to use
So the message he tries to deliver to the rest of the group is also like a political reparation that is required. So it's about Israeli.
There's always something.
Yeah, it looks like we have need
It makes it lighter. So yeah, her message is political, but she also almost says it was like an automatic process, almost like a prophet. Prophet, like when you think about the archetypical prophet, it's a person who has a message through vision, and then he delivers or she delivers a message to people around. A lot of times it's moral judgment, it's political. The person himself see himself on the history, on the pages of history of maybe a person that can bring change to people around them. So the person who kind of becomes for a moment the archetypical prophet is driven with a mission. And this is sometimes kind of like I see the relationship to what we think about, or the archetypical mystical experience, unitive experience, which is the experience of probably everybody in psychedelic research talk about, whatever this experience is, or whatever we call it mystical or not, but it's a lot of times an experience of oneness, and it's an experience that can be beyond good and bad, beyond time and space, beyond morality. It's a very apolitical, amoral, sometimes very abstract experience. So what I'm saying here is that there are obviously many types of psychedelic experiences, and there are psychedelic experiences that have also this kind of more moral quality into them, with a more concrete message. So a lot of the people that actually we studied in this kind of in the ayahuasca scene in Israel, they're obviously very much influenced from Western spirituality, from a New Age culture, and the kind of the experience of oneness or the mystical union is central to that. So they would say mysticism unifies while politics divide. And this is kind of the ethos of the place. So the rituals we observed were very apolitical, and like very rigidly apolitical. So they denied, very much political reality, including, Palestinian identities, or not talking about also like, if you speak about occupation or oppression, you already bring duality into the space, so you kind of fracture the achievement of oneness and harmony. But what I want to argue here is that while there's a very ethos of oneness in the space, there are also political kind of things rupture the space, because in the end, this is also part of reality. Even when the space tries to be very apolitical, the rituals we observe were trying to be very apolitical, politics entered through visions of people that relates to diversity and trauma. So there's a long history of like politics and psychedelics, and the idea that like maybe the psychedelics are apolitical is something that's relatively like a Western idea, very much not in all psychedelic circles, but some clear history. Sorry. Some clear political history of psychedelics that could be found in the Amazon. So the diffusion of ayahuasca in the Amazon happened a lot during the rubber boom. So this is a time in which indigenous people suffered from a lot of atrocities from colonialism. So a lot of indigenous people were killed at these moments, and a lot of violence was inflicted on them. And Tausig has like this anthropological research on indigenous experiences and indigenous kind of cosmology, but it's very much in relation to political reality of those colonizers, and the experience themselves a lot of times relate to colonization or the grabbing of land from indigenous people, or environmental catastrophe that the colonizers are bringing on the indigenous people. And these play in the indigenous also cosmology and the use of ayahuasca. And the same with peyote. Peyote was spread across from Central America to North America 150 years ago, in a quite politically dense situation. And the ideology of peyote cults, which later became Native American Church, was very much almost messianic. Through the use of peyote, would bring the unity of the indigenous people in opposition to colonialism, and that would bring that would save humanity from ecological catastrophe as well. It kind of plays into those narratives. So this is a history of peyote as well, at least in the beginning. So I'm saying there's a political, there can be political moments, revelations, or visions for people. But what I observed in the studies, if you look at, I'll explain about them more, are related to actually when the situation doesn't try to be political, and politics still rupture the space. So I'm going to use the theory of politicized philosophy of Alain Badiou and to explain this. So I'm kind of like using Badiou, that's like a very metaphysical theory, but what I'm going to do is also bring it more to phenomenological content into this. And I'm not sure that Badiou would approve this, as like, but I think with psychedelics, there's a lot of times this closer relationship between metaphysics and phenomenology. So we can almost see or experience the metaphysical things that we speak about. So when I'm using Badiou's theory, it's also this, it's very anthropological and phenomenological and kind of bringing it from metaphysics to experience. So I'm going to try to, it's a very complex, philosophy or ideas that he created. I'm going to try to very much simplify them here, but if I'm not clear or if you want me to extend on something, please let me know. So for Badiou, every situation consists from different parts, and parts can be thoughts, chairs, dreams, stories, anything that consists of reality. But then we structure reality. Okay, so he kind of said we structure reality by inclusion of parts into reality, and he kind of uses set theory. So set theory, the Venn diagram, set inclusion and exclusion. He kind of uses that in order to explain how we structure our reality. So when we structure the reality, we always include part, and every part is also structured from many parts. But while we do this structuring, there's always stuff that we exclude. And from every situation, there's stuff which we did not include in our perception of the situation, structuring. So he calls whatever we exclude, he calls it the void of the situation or the unconsciousness of the situation. So there's things which are there, but we don't really process or perceive them. So this is kind of the void, and it's always in relation to the void and structure. Sorry, I missed that, but this theory is explained in a book called Being and Event, and the book has also a few sequels. So being is like the situation, the structure, but then there's the event, the rare moments, sometimes that kind of rupture or break the structure. And these are a lot of this theory is actually about these events, talking about events. So the event is when something that is in the void of the situation, in the unconscious of the situation, is suddenly revealed, is suddenly seen, experienced. It can happen in science, the paradigm shift, or it can happen in art. It can happen in politics, as he's very much explaining it through politics, and it can happen in the realm of love. So falling in love, suddenly there's a new existential intensity to life from this. So events, when they happen, they what follows them is what he calls a truth procedure. So it's a procedure that tries to now include what was excluded, the excluded part. It tries to change the structure in order to include that new thing in the structure. So again, the idea of paradigm shift is the most obvious one. Let's say in science, whenever something is revealed which is beyond the regular scientific knowledge, a lot of the scientific knowledge needs to change and adapt to it in order to include this new thing. So this is a truth procedure. And again, these procedures happen in science and art, so it's usually by a subject, an individual that tries to change structure around, in love between two individuals, or in politics, which is it's a collective trying to push towards something. So this idea of like the revolutionary moment is the event. Suddenly, from nowhere comes a revolutionary moment, And we have these moments in history in which like revolution just suddenly emerged. It almost feels like that. There was a baseline and suddenly something is triggered and it creates a cascade of like a revolutionary movement. So he calls that the truth procedure is this kind of attempt to restructure the structure to include what was excluded, the event, and the people or the things that do this. These are the subject. The subject can be a person, but it can be also a collective. And the subject operates in loyalty to the event. So, well, it says in fidelity to the event. The subject develops its relationship to the moment of rupture, to the event, and now the subject tries to change the reality around them in loyalty to what was revealed for a moment. Is that clear until now? So tell me, because it's kind of it's a good place to stop. Like, no? So what's interesting philosophically about Badiou is that although he operates in like post-structuralism, post-modernism, so it's kind of like the idea that's like everything's structure and there's no like truth, he kind of reframes the idea of truth based on what is outside of structure. So he would say that the truth procedure, it's not truth is not a thing, it's a procedure of seeing something or there is something that's beyond our structuring. That thing is universal, it has a universal quality, and slowly we structure it. Once it's in the structure, it's not truth anymore. It becomes part of our like, regular knowledge or regular structure. So we can think about, there's a great paper of Salhana, who talks about the LSD event. So he talks about the 1943 Hoffman event as a moment that kind of created truth procedure from it. So we can imagine like the social chemical structuring of
That come in more noisily.
so just talking about Hoffman.
Sorry?
Talking about Hoffman. So maybe you want to move there just to
Which one you want?
I like the eye contact with Peter once in a while. So it's really reaffirming. So the Hoffman event, we can imagine it as like a big event society started by a person that something in him changed completely, his understanding of reality. And there's the ripples in society that follow this event. These ripples are in science, in art, in politics, in mysticism or spirituality, but they're all ripples of original event in Western society, which is the 1943 Hoffman event. So we can think this is like a psychedelic example of what is an event and how something that suddenly is a surprise, unexpected, can change the structure around the ripples and truth procedures. So while this is like can be framed as an event, what I would try to claim is that psychedelics can induce also events. They can. They're not always doing that. It's not what psychedelics do, but they can create events for individuals or for a collective that kind of lead into certain procedures and aftermath after that. So based on the data I have here, I would say that maybe first I'll explain actually what is the Israeli-Palestinian data I'm presenting. So we did like it's ethnographic data and phenomenological data, so it's an observational research of Israelis and Palestinians who drink ayahuasca together. It's mostly the underground in Israel and Palestine. The groups are not retreats, so they're kind of a continuous practice. They're kind of communities that maybe will meet once a month or once a year. Same group of people, core people is always there, but then it's kind of changing. It's mainly Israelis organize them. Palestinians are a minority in this group, so it's not like groups that come for conflict resolution. These are groups that come for just regular reasons people do psychedelics in Western society. And it happens to be that Palestinians are joining this group mainly because Palestinian access to ayahuasca is usually through Israelis. So it's a matter of access as well. So we did 31 interviews of people from these groups, from 5 different groups. It was like a road trip for a month and a half with a Palestinian friend, who's a Palestinian activist, and with Natalie Ginsburg from MAPS. And we just went and interviewed people. There was also participatory observation, so I went to some of those rituals, ceremonies, and the first analysis I did of this, and I'm not presenting it here, was basically just a phenomenological analysis. So one of the papers that came out from this are a phenomenological analysis of relational processes that happen in those rituals. So experiences that happen between people that relates to the context, to the Palestinian context. What I'm presenting today is more kind of case studies, but like everything psychedelic, we need to explain the context, certain setting, the experience itself, what we'll say here, the event in those case studies, and the aftermath, what follows the experiences, the integration maybe, or the truth procedure as I framed them here. So what I'm going to argue that based on the observations that we saw here is that the structure of the ritual that we observe mirrors Israeli society. So it's not necessarily equal between Israelis and Palestinians. It mirrors the asymmetry or the power dynamics between Israelis and Palestinians that exist in larger society. That the ethos of harmony and oneness that's in that space actually preserve the asymmetry, the power dynamics, doesn't change it, actually serve a conservative function in preserving the asymmetry. But there are events that break from that moment of oneness, and then therefore they're revolutionary in potential. They kind of ignite a revolutionary spirit. And what happens later is that fidelity, people who had such events, they kind of become loyal to the event, they become loyal to the moment, and they continue to, after that, in loyalty to this moment, to try to change the practice or adapt the practice, or kind of, it's always in relation to the practice, but the structure will always oppose them, and there will be, like, the subjects become divided. They're still part of these circles, but they also develop some opposition and try to change them. So they're divided between their event, the revelation, and the belonging to the structure itself. But this energy, the revolutionary energy, brings the diffusion and the diversification of the practice.
Do you give an example, like of the events or the revelations, like just to understand a little bit more?
Yeah,
You get
I'll get there. I'll start with the context, with the kind of setting, then to the events, and aftermath. Yeah. So. But one example is the one I started with, right? So Rukaya's revelation of conflict of war. What is revealed in there, and what I'll claim that's actually missing, is the Palestinian collective trauma. So Palestinian identity and collective trauma is denied from that space, from these ritual and structure. It's uncommunicated, it's not part of the language, but suddenly it's revealed in a moment, and it's about Palestinian identity or Palestinian trauma that reveals and breaks the oneness of the ritual. So, like Rukaya's revelation, keep that in mind. So it's a revelation of Palestinian pain. It's a revelation that relates to injustice, inequality, to occupation, subjugation, but it's a very painful moment as well. And the way she sang also in confidence as a messenger, delivery, the language she speaks about that moment of trying to transmit the message to the rest of the group is very much in like loyalty, in fidelity. It's very like in confidence that relates to the vision that she sees or the pain that she feels. So ayahuasca, as I said, has this history in the Amazon. And the history in the Amazon is mainly diffused 300, like there's maybe thousands of years of practice in the Amazon of ayahuasca in small communities. The diffusion starts into the rest of the Amazon around 300, 400 years ago with missionaries, and then 150 years ago in the rubber room. It's the main diffusion. And then the global diffusion of ayahuasca happens through Santo Daime, UDV that suddenly become kind of global churches, and through neo-shamanic practices, Western practices, and the relationship with tourism. Western people go to Amazon and then bring the practice back home, bring the shamans back home, and that's kind of tourism becomes part of this kind of global movement of ayahuasca. So ayahuasca arrives to Israel around 20 years ago, and it's already through Psychedelics and through shamanic practices, and it already becomes changes and acquires like a Jewish or Israeli cultural practice. So it's kind of this using Amazonian traditions, but it starts to be very Jewish as well in Israel, and there's a kind of an Israel New Age flourishing. There's a lot of like Israeli New Agers. It doesn't necessarily have to relate to even left orientation or liberal orientation. It's quite like a widespread practice of spirituality, and so ayahuasca is part of that. So there's like Jewish songs, some Israeli songs in it, some thing from the Kabbalah as part of the interpretation of the experiences. But it's still always in that kind of global network of like Amazonian, Western, Jewish kind of practice. And then 5 to 10 years ago, Palestinians start joining the practice. Also, the Palestinian psychedelic use becomes larger. The Palestinian socio-economical status, kind of the middle class of Palestinians grows, and that grows also the seeking of these type of technologies or practices. So the psychedelic Palestinian rave scene starts flourishing, but that's very much independent from Israelis. But for ayahuasca, the access is only through Israelis. So they start joining these spaces, but they're a minority in the space, not just by numbers. They have also less of like, they also the spaces in Hebrew, while their first language is Arabic. They don't have the kind of cultural kind of background in like meditation or yoga or like the fashion or the spiritual fashion. So they have like less cultural capital when they enter that space. They have less experience with psychedelics, so they rely on the facilitation of Israelis. They rely on like Israeli musicians and helpers and facilitators and organizers. So the power dynamics are staying like this. They rely on Israelis to guide them in the experience. But people are kind of seeking still, while there's this power dynamics, people who join the space and the space are mixed, they're very proud in moments of like oneness or unity or identity dissolution. So many people, and these are very important moments for many of the participants, they would speak about that like all identities dissolve in the moment. So it's kind of, if you imagine the mystical type experience, kind of on the social level, the identity dissolution, this is an important moment for them. So they speak about human connection, or not being, especially for Palestinians, not being in relation constantly towards their identity. So there's a moment of relief from identity in their interaction with Israelis. At least that's what they feel in these moments of oneness in the rituals. So it kind of dissolves their identities. And that brings actually like joy and connection between people. So there's the people who talk about, peace starts from within, all is one, ayahuasca is beyond left and right, it's human to human, so the space becomes very apolitical. But while it's universal and apolitical and very much kind of new age, it also allows some interfaith and intercultural exchange. So there are obviously, as I said, there's Jewish kind of elements of the practice. So also the Palestinians, they start bringing Arab or Muslim elements to the practice. So they bring prayers from the Quran, or they bring Arabic music into their rituals. But what they cannot really bring is the conflict, so their Palestinian identity. So if you look at the Israeli society, and especially Palestinians who live in Israel, so not in the West Bank, they've been in a process of being denationalized for many years. So while they're considered themselves as Palestinians, the state does not consider them to be Palestinians. They consider them as Muslims, Israeli Arabs, Christian, Jews, Bedouins. It kind of denies the national identity from them because that national identity is in opposition to the Israeli national identity. So they've been to a process that they try to assimilate to Israeli society and kind of have a civil equality in Israeli society, but they're never equal because they're Arabs. The state laws are very much for Jewish people. There's kind of this democratic, but it's Jewish. So they never can completely have a complete civil equality, and they're denied some part of their identity. This is mostly obvious when about the Nakba. So the Nakba is the Palestinian collective trauma. It's the dislocation of Palestinians from their home in 1948. It's the migration of most of Palestinian population in 1948 moved from their homes in war to Israel. So Israelis, and for Israelis it's the Independence Day, for Palestinians it's the catastrophe, the Nakba is the catastrophe. And that the Nakba is historically denied from Palestinians by the Israeli state. So there's no recognition or acknowledgement that this thing happened. So it's part of the kind of collective trauma that's very much relates to the Palestinian identity that is denied by Israelis. So that energy cannot come into those communities that form around ayahuasca, because trying to bring that already starts bringing conflict and it becomes disharmonious to the space. And this problem is kind of known from peace research as well. So a lot of times reconciliation groups that only try to bring friendships, they're harmony oriented, and we can all eat hummus together, or all eat falafel together, we're all the same. If that is the energy of the group, it will deny the conflict itself. So people in peace research call it the irony in harmony. So if you focus on creating a small group which is very harmonious, you create an illusion of equality, while equality doesn't exist outside of that group, and therefore change cannot happen towards outside of the group. So it kind of suppresses the anger or the activism energy that's required for societal change. So the same thing was kind of observed in those groups in a way that oneness is stabilizing the status quo in those groups. So for that reason, I claim that the Palestinian identity is on the edge of the void, using Badiou terms. It's part of the unconsciousness of the experience. It's there, but it's not really there. It's not structured. It's not recognized. And events are moments in which the Palestinian identity becomes suddenly revealed in a strong way, including the collective trauma of Palestinians. So, as I said, ruptures of oneness can happen. The process of the case studies that we observed, they followed a certain kind of process which was similar. It starts by a person, a subject that has become separated from the rest of the group. Then there's a visionary event related to historical collective trauma of Palestinian people. It's a painful event. It makes people angry or feel guilt. It's like a challenging emotionally. And then there's the delivery of the message that follows the event. It's almost, at the moment, it feels almost automatic for people. But what everybody kind of also talked about is while their delivery of message was related to Palestinians or the injustice happened to Palestinians, the message is universal. So the message is about humanity at large. It's kind of seeking maybe liberation of Palestinians, but it's about the human spirit and liberation of the human spirit from oppression. And this is aligned with something that Badiou speaks about, that while the event is particular, it's about the thing that is outside of the structure, it's also universal. It has a feeling of something universal, just because that thing is outside. So it is the revolutionary spirit of liberating the whole of humanity and bringing equality to everybody. And then what happens after is that the person continues his life in loyalty to the event, but the structure will fight back. So there's the dynamics of that. It's not easy to stay loyal to these moments forever. So we'll share 3 case studies. What is that clear until now? How much is my time? 20 minutes. Okay. So again, slow me down or ask questions whenever. It can be quite a heavy topic, so if you want to slow down, we'll shake things. So, Khalil, this is the story of Khalil. Khalil is a Palestinian, lives in Israel. Also, like Rukaya, very assimilated to Israeli culture. He grew up in an Israeli Jewish educational system, and he says that until his event, he was brainwashed by the Israeli education system. So he was like very right-wing, like a right-wing Israeli in his ideology. And this is kind of his background. He started drinking ayahuasca to solve personal trauma, like a conflict he had with his friend that was traumatic for his life. And he starts slowly kind of getting deeper into the psychedelic practice and with drinking with Israelis. And in one of the ceremonies, it was a ceremony that had a very strong Jewish orientation. So most of the ceremonies are kind of like mixed. They're not strongly Jewish. This ceremony was very Jewish. It was like Friday evening, the welcoming of the Shabbat. And everybody dressed in white, they sing Hebrew songs, Jewish songs in welcoming the Shabbat. And he didn't come dressed as white. It was for other Palestinians there. He didn't come, he came in just regular clothes, and then they gave him white clothes and changed him. But he already felt an outsider from the moment he entered. The fashion kind of a lot of times reveals who's the outsider. So he feels an outsider over there, doesn't feel belong to the situation. And he decides to go sit outside on the porch. And while he's there, he's feeling like he starts losing his mind. He sees everything flashing very strong, like white light flashing very strong. And he kind of holds his head and he kind of is worried that he's going to lose his sanity forever. He's worried of like being separated from everybody, being lonely and madness. And then he starts raising his head towards to pray to God, towards the sky. But while he raises his head, he sees two Palestinian people in the balcony in front of him. So this is a vision, and he sees two old Palestinian people wearing traditional clothes. And they kind of drink coffee, and they kind of speak to him very softly and passionately. And they tell him, Khalil, we know that you grow in the Israeli system, but just we want to let you know that it's a beautiful house that you're sitting in right now and doing the ceremony. You see the architecture of the house. This house is Palestinian, and we used to live here before 48. And suddenly he has this kind of like realizing the shock, realizing the Nakba, realizing the pain of those two old people that he sees in his vision. And it kind of brings anger mainly towards himself, and not necessarily towards the group, towards himself of kind of maybe denying part of himself for a long time, or not being connected to this trauma or denying that. So he suddenly kind of feels this kind of Palestinian background, trauma, identity, heritage, and he comes to the ceremony and he on purpose tries to disrupt it. So he tries to sing in Arabic in a very kind of disharmonious way, in a way that disrupts the ceremony. He wants to teach people in the ceremony that this house is actually Palestinian. And it's kind of like he comes with a message to show them what he saw to other people. And at the moment, he kind of brings that anger with him. And the Israeli facilitator is quickly diffusing that anger. He invites Khalil to sit next to him, and he tells Khalil, he starts playing Lebanese Arabic music as well, but with celebratory music. And suddenly the whole thing becomes this Arab celebration. Everybody go and hug Khalil, and actually there's like a lot of love in the moment. It's a very meaningful moment to him. But also, it's a moment in which the anger was diffused. It was kind of the moment of the message that Khalil was trying to bring, which is an angry one, was diffused towards like an Arab celebration of a cultural Arabist culture, but not necessarily Palestinian as an identity that's in conflict with Israelis. So for him, Khalil says that this is where the journey began. This is where he started changing his life. He says that he was unbrainwashed in that moment, and he was slowly clean to receive the truth. But for him, it wasn't about like taking out the Palestinian side. It suddenly became more universal. So his political views were more became more central. And he holds this kind of strong universalistic worldview from that moment. So he kind of understands, again, the pain that's happening to Palestinians, and the attempt to change that as not identity politics for Palestinians, but more as like a universal kind of liberation attempt from injustice, which is also has this kind of universal quality. So he becomes an important player in diffusing the practice and changing the practice. And his energy is like very confident, charismatic. A lot of people start being attracted to what he does from the Palestinian side. And he creates groups in the beginning which are more equal, Israelis and Palestinians, but also groups which eventually creates groups which are only Palestinians. So he starts bringing also Palestinian music into the ceremonies and starting to change the practice according to would fit Palestinians, and will also be independent from the power dynamics that I said, independent from the facilitation by Israelis. So it becomes an important player in diffusing the practice. Going to the story of Ruqayya. So that's clear, the story? Kind of clear as an example for the process of Badiou that I'm trying to portray. So the story of Ruqayya, as I said, Ruqayya, I mentioned her story, her revelation, at least in the beginning, and she delivers this message also that relates to Palestinian emancipation, but she holds this strong universalistic views as well. So when I ask her about what is the meaning of the opening of the Quran, the song that she sang in the beginning of while she saw those visions. So she says that the meaning for her of the opening of the Quran is that all those who go by certain laws which are illusionary and fake, they separate from the human itself, from humanity, from what we are human. So she holds a very humanistic worldview that relates to the liberation of Palestinians. It's revolutionary. But people around her kind of doesn't necessarily understand her message or doesn't resonate with her message, her friends. And it's not easy for her to try to convince others around her about her issues as a Palestinian, about inequality. A lot of people would say, yeah, whatever, what is Palestinians? There's no duality. There's no such thing as Israelis and Palestinian. It's just an illusion. And when she operates in that space, it's hard for her to actually convince other people that this identity is also there's an injustice that happened to these people. So it's just some people kind of follow her, but some people don't really understand what she's trying to say. So an example of like a denial of her message can happen through, as I said, by kind of this universalistic, there's no identities, there's no good and bad, there's no oppressor or oppressed. But it also can be through psychologizing her process. So for example, Leor, who's Israeli facilitator, I told him about the political revelations and kind of gave this as an example for him. And he says that her moment, her political moment, or that story was meant for her. It was meant for her as a cathartic moment of her political past or collective trauma. And it's meant to heal her from the shadows. It's a shadow work meant to heal her from the shadow. But while that might be true, and might healing happen towards, bringing up collective traumas to the surface, what denies that the anger or the catharsis of anger that that happened to her was also a message to other people. It's also an attempt to change society around her. So it's not just a personal process of catharsis, it's also a person in relation to the environment and the attempt to change the environment. So from that moment of her vision, she's in a mission. And her mission, even a Tishatian mission, that's right, who can change the Israeli state? The revolutionary mission is almost impossible. People usually feel very weak and hopeless in order to try to change politics in Israel. But she's in a kind of full confidence in her mission. And she usually worked with Palestinian women and try to bring them in ceremonies. She starts facilitating ceremonies, and she brings try to bring them to sing in ceremonies. So her kind of process and mission is also related to liberation from Israeli subjugation, but also from patriarchy and like the Palestinian traditional society, which women are more oppressed or more subjugated over there. So the women in Palestinian society, a lot of times in Israel, will talk about this double oppression. And she kind of, in that process, that's a lot about womanhood. Her vision was also related to the land. So that is, if you remember, she saw the pain of the land. She saw the blood that's dripping into the land in her vision. And she sees the land as a feminine energy, and also other Palestinian women have this kind of a similar vision of seeing the bleeding land or feeling the pain of the land, or kind of relating the pain of the land to pain of women, or oppression of the land by occupation of the land by men is also related to a relationship between the genders. So that's kind of part of her process. But politicization is slow. So besides her trying to diffuse the practice like fidelity, bring it more to Palestinians, she also tries to politicize the practice. So while she operates in a very apolitical kind of neo-shamanic sphere, she tries to bring politics into the practice. So, for example, a few years after her vision, she finds slowly like-minded people to work with. She finds those people in the realm of sacred activism that try to kind of bring activism closer to spirituality. And she does a ceremony together with them. And during the ceremony, she has a strong inspiration, a moment of she speaks almost as possessed, from the outside, it looks like this. Speaks about, in biblical Hebrew, in archaic Hebrew, she speaks about the Israelites who were oppressed by Moses and were liberated by Moses and now become pharaohs, become the oppressor. And by speaking in kind of biblical language, kind of brings this kind of spiritual tone to the ceremony, but she has a very concrete political message that she brings into the psychedelic ritual, into the ayahuasca ritual. And this is her attempt to kind of change the practice. So again, her vision leads to both diffusion of the practice, but also attempt to change the practice itself, or the structure. Clear? Moving to, yeah.
Just a small question about the Israeli facilitators in the first example.
Yeah.
Because I kept thinking that they diffuse this uncomfortable moment, right? That's how I understood it, by making it kind of celebratory. What are the ripple effects, not with Hamid, but with this community of Israeli facilitators?
Yeah.
Do they open up for making the conflict part of the practice?
Not necessarily, no, because a lot of times the agenda is that it's like post-national in a way, and maybe it's like a utopian idea, which may be a good idea, like we don't need nation states or we all universal human beings. So when they hear things which are related to the conflict, they kind of avoid dealing with it. So they would see the Palestinians more as like Arabs, which is kind of a more, it's a global identity, or Muslims. Again, it's like a religious kind of global identity, but they don't like talking about the idea of a Palestinian. So therefore, they don't really engage with the conflict. It's very much, I can see it as like a spiritual bypassing of political reality. They prefer to see like the oneness and we're all one, but when actually talking about but there's actually occupation and injustice happening, they're like no, it's like I don't want to hear about it. So it's like this. So while they're in a mixed space and they have interactions with Palestinians, they're not necessarily engaged in they might create a culture which is a culture of unity and oneness and create strong friendships and bonds. But they're not engaged so much in political realities of oppression. Because that even idea of occupation of oppression feels very dissonant to the spirituality of harmony and oneness. Yeah, so that's kind of So the irony of harmony. So the harmony can maintain the status quo, or too much fetishizing of harmony can mean, obviously that has a good quality, we want to live in harmony, but fetishizing and trying to bring it in every situation can serve actually inequalities and injustice.
Yeah, in your two examples, they don't write the terminology wrong, but they had events and then there was fidelity to the events, and were there people in your work that had a kind of event or a vision, but there was no fidelity to that?
Yes, so probably the next example of his fidelity is very confused. It might have happened in the moment, but it got diffused very fast. And again, there might be I chose those case studies that have everything because that's what fits, the theory that I'm working with. But obviously, there are many revelations, visions, which don't necessarily follow with fidelity. So the story of Amos. Amos is an Israeli ex-military soldier, and like every Israeli, including myself, after the army, you kind of hipify yourself. We go travel in South America, India, Australia, leave the country for a year, try to live in freedom and kind of detach yourself from the baggage of the military. So Amos is like one of those. He becomes a traveler musician. He becomes like a kind of this Israeli hippie that's kind of all over the world, Australia, South America, Europe, and slowly also becomes an important musician in the neo-shamanic practices in Israel. So in the ayahuasca and San Pedro practices in Israel. So he's already kind of a musician, but never facilitates their ceremonies or never really leads ceremonies in song. So he's a percussionist. And it's the first time that he sits with Palestinians in the ceremony. And the Palestinians in that ceremony, they came a group of 5 people from the West Bank. So usually, as I said, there's a different relationship of Israelis between with Palestinians from the West Bank or the Palestinians from Israel. The Palestinians from the West Bank, they're like obviously Palestinians. Their identity as Palestinians is in a way clearer than the Palestinians in Israel, which have a more complex identity. So the Palestinians from the West Bank are sitting there in the ceremony, and during his experience, he suddenly sees them as a separate group. He sees their kind of like almost darkness behind them, and he sees them as a one unit, as a collective unit of pain and agony and darkness. So he suddenly feels really much their pain in the ceremony, and kind of very much relates to this. And suddenly he has a strong a strong vision, a strong revelation that relates to his past army service. So he's in a special unit. He did like many house arrests in the army. A lot of them were very casual. So soldiers, sometimes you go to a village and you need to arrest everybody who's 18 to 23, regardless of what they did. So it's like house arrests are just like a regular part of like the occupation work in Pakistan. So he has a flashback of like one of these like regular house arrests. It wasn't like a trauma of war. It was a mundane trauma of everyday just occupation. And he sees himself with a special unit, a vision of him with the ski mask and holding the gun, and they kind of burst in the door of a Palestinian house, and there's a Palestinian family there, and they search for this Palestinian guy, the relatively young one, and they take him, they arrest him, they find him, they arrest him, and then they take him to the Jeep, and then suddenly he has a cut in the scene, and he sees everything from the side of the family. So he sees the same vision again, but it's like evening. Everybody, or like the whole family is there. The grandparents, the children, and the parents. They're watching TV. They're playing some board games, and it's kind of a nice family evening atmosphere. And suddenly, a group of soldiers bursts in and recognizes himself from the side. He sees like his eyes through the face mask, And he kind of says like it's almost looking at like something very cold, like he brings the image of a Robocop, or looking at, like he says, I look like in the film of Nazis, so he brings his own kind of collective trauma into the story, and he suddenly feels all the hysteria and the pain in the house. So the kind of family is there's a lot of happening. The soldiers take the guy out and leave him, and then stays with the pain of the family in the moment. It feels like he changed the whole life of a whole family in the moment. He fractured the life of the whole family. He says he wouldn't be surprised if some of the kids of the house will become terrorists. Kind of this idea that there's the cycles of pain that he was part of. So he returns from this vision into the ritual, and he feels guilt. Guilt is compared to what I said with Haya and Khalil, which was anger. His emotion is guilt because he feels, he's the bad guy at the moment. So he feels this guilt, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He sits with it, and then he says that suddenly, almost like automatically, he asks for the facilitators to sing a song. And this is happening in the beginning of the ceremony. So usually in the rituals that I observed, and in many shamanic rituals, maybe by the last third of the ceremony, the floor is open for everybody to bring their own music and prayers. So this is usually kind of a participatory element of rituals. But in this case, he very much in the beginning of the ritual, he asks, I want to sing a song, and then he kind of sits there and he almost says he feels like possessed by the song. He's like channeling. He doesn't know where he has the song from or where he heard it. And it's a Hebrew version of a peyote song, and it's about his connection to the land, or the connection of people to the land, and about recognition of the connection to the land. So the lyrics is. Sorry, I forgot them. Yeah. Never mind. But the lyrics are about the connection to the land and the kind of the relationship between people and that, and the recognition of that place of people. So obviously that connection is denied by Palestinians, by Israelis. The relationship of the land of Palestinians is denied, and it's a way, a war of like Israelis saying we're more indigenous than you, because we were here 2,000 years ago, you're not really indigenous, and denying the connection of Palestinians from the land. So the song for him has also this kind of political undertone, but he says that he feels like a messenger in the moment. So he brings a lot of confidence. He's usually not a very confident person. He never sings by himself in a ceremony, and he brings a lot of confidence. And he felt like he says that it almost like felt like a preacher man. Like he really brings this energy of like preaching this kind of truth to the rest of the group, and through the song. And that's the energy he brings, and that shifts things in the rituals. The ceremony itself changes in the moment. Also, the Palestinians, after his song, kind of the energy is kind of more relaxed, and also the Palestinians feel comfortable in singing. So the Palestinians did not sing in this group, did not sing until this moment, and immediately after it saw a Palestinian person singing, bring like a Palestinian song. So it shifted some of the dynamics, and became close friends to the Palestinian people in those groups, and they're still kind of in touch. But as I said, after that, he became very divided between what is the meaning of his event, what is the truth in it. He's not really clear about it, and he very fast kind of falls back into his previous worldview. Doesn't maintain that kind of stability for a long time. I think probably because guilt is harder to maintain than anger, so it's like you cannot hold that guilt for so long. So the old structure kind of comes back, and the old structure kind of doesn't have the guilt as much. For example, he's becoming friends with these Palestinian people, and he sees them in Facebook criticizing the Israeli state on the war in Gaza, and he kind of tells me in an interview, why would they criticize us? These are my friends. We were sitting together in a ceremony, how he can criticize it, you know, like it's about humans, it's not about politics. And he kind of like, while he created his friendship, still like right now what's important for him is only the friendship with them. But once they bring the political tension that exists, he kind of doesn't want to hear it, or he doesn't understand how it relates to their practice together of oneness and universalism. But I can say that he's many years after, and I met him a few times, but it seems like he's always confused. He doesn't really, and he kind of still has some loyalty to the event, but he doesn't know how to express it. He doesn't have people around him that he can express this with, so he's always in tension. He continues to seek how to work with that, whatever was revealed to him at the moment. But he doesn't, it's not clear for him. I think it created like some confusion for him. So this was the story of Amos. Was that clear? Questions? Moving to conclusions, yeah.
You said that there's like these instances where the loyalty to the event diffuses. Have you also encountered there was like more active resistance to it, or is that like incorporated in the framework or not?
Active resistance by
the event itself, or what it brings, like the consequences of regulations.
More like a denial, you know. So it's like not really like that active resistance. It can be just like people give different ways of subverting the political meaning. You know? I can say that I was, you know, just by sharing those stories, I was accused of anti-Semitism. I guess that's like aggressive, like reaction.
Okay.
But like that, like talking about, you know, criticizing the Israeli state can bring a lot of reactions back. So, but in the state, in the structure of like the spirituality, the thing that we observe, I think the denial happens more. Just people don't want to bring the conflict so much to the situation because they don't want to break the harmony. So what they do is just express that, don't share that, or they just leave those groups and try to do something else. Yeah. So, as I said, like through those case studies, I want to claim that there are revelatory events. They follow a certain Badiouian kind of process. They're political in nature. It's not just like the apolitical oneness of the kind of experience of the union. They have a political content in them. And this, I would like to claim, is related to other observations that happen in other places. One is the observations of Topsy in the Amazon. Observations through ethnographic work relating a lot of times the apocalyptic visions of indigenous people as revolutionary moments as well. So apocalyptic visions can be of atrocities that happen in the Amazon, and they relate to the past, but they also relate as a warning from the future. And that kind of traumatic visions of Amazonian atrocities in the Putumayo region in Colombia, where a lot of violence has happened to them, also ignited a kind of psychedelic ayahuasca revolutionary spirit in the indigenous people in these observations. Another example of even non-psychedelic example of this is the writings of Walter Benjamin, and he kind of claims that collective trauma can ignite this kind of messianic revolutionary force. So he says that a lot of times there's a relationship between being connected or being related, like that's related to collective trauma, and what it brings, it can be a really universal revolutionary force. That while it's related to a specific collective trauma, it's also universal in its energy. So those visions, the revelations are, regardless of Badiou, I kind of frame them as a revolutionary procedures. So they are procedures that, from a moment, they try to change the reality around them. Therefore, they're not just about the experience a person would have, they're about the process that they ignite, that tries to change and shift the reality around. So they bring the confidence to people, and they also can bring charisma. So this is Badiou would say that the truth procedure, the procedure that follows on the event is a charismatic procedure. So it's a procedure that attracts people into it. So we can imagine what I said like about the Hoffman event, the psychedelic movement. We can imagine that there's something happened that creates ripples in society, that there's some attraction of people into like a revolutionary spirit. Once this revolution is almost seems to be right now too mainstreamed or appropriated for-profit kind of businesses away from counterculture, the charisma is also kind of lost a bit. People become less attracted to the kind of revolutionary, we can change the world idea. It becomes more a thing, of part of the structure. So I would say that psychedelics can ignite revolutionary events because they follow with the process that tries to change society. I gave the examples of Bukhaya and Khalil that try to politicize the practice and try to diffuse the practice of Palestinians. There are two other historical examples of psychedelics that I would like to share. One is of Master Revenel, who's the father of Santa Daimi. So he was a rubber taper, a black African person working in the Amazon during the rubber boom. And he drank with indigenous people. But he had the vision of the queen of the forest. For him, it was Virgin Mary, and he broke from a kind of indigenous cosmology and tried to create a very syncretic church that includes, in Brazil, many identities. So in Brazil, the identities are African, they're indigenous, they're European, they're Portuguese, and he tried to bring all of these identities in syncretic approach towards one practice. And then Santa Daimi later on, by the person who followed him, actually had another of like those schism and became universalized. So those moments of schisms, of breakage from whatever ideas were before, there are also moments of like they have a power of fusion, power of universalizing the practice and bringing it to more people. Another example is of Allen Ginsberg. So Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet, famous beat poet, American. So at the time, LSD was very much just used by academic institutions and before the whole LSD counterculture thing. So LSD was used by academic institutions and maybe by some artists and philosophers. And Huxley was very much promoting this approach. So Huxley is known to be quite elitist in his approach. So he argued that psychedelics should be used only by those with a cultural background to use them. They should not be used by the masses. They should be used by philosophers and artists, intellectual people. And this is what was promoting. And the moment of breakage, there are a few breakages in that. One is Ken Kesey in the West Coast, and one is Leary in Harvard. But that break of Leary is very much related to Allen Ginsberg event. So Ginsberg and Burroughs, another poet, they were drinking in the Amazon. Yahe, they wrote about it, the Yahe letters. It's kind of the first, one of the first known Western accounts of the Yahe, drinking Yahe. At least culturally, and they come back and they go and meet Leary, and then they tell Leary, look, like in the Amazon, we do it with a curandero, with like this facilitator and a group. And Leary says, okay, I'll try to do this and to you guys, and does a ceremony, a mushroom ceremony to Ginsberg. And Leary back then was still very much part of like the Harvard structure. It didn't break loose, from that. He wasn't into the dropout kind of attitude, and he was also very much close to Huxley. So he was a Huxley protege. It's known that like Huxley, when he died, he was injected by his wife with LSD. What's less known was Leary was also standing next to him, and Leary provided LSD to Huxley's wife. So he was actually there. They had a relationship, and Huxley was also kind of, I think, felt that Leary Watts is also up to, and also try to tell him, Leary, don't break loose, you know, stay in like whatever we're doing, don't move outside of that. But then Allen Ginsberg came, and Leary was sitting for Ginsberg, and Ginsberg has a strong vision full of agony and pain, apocalyptic, losing his mind, and Leary comes and kind of relaxes him, and it turns into like a very messianic idea of like, let's bring psychedelics to the people, and Ginsberg kind of takes off his clothes, start running back in the apartment, try to call different world leaders, tell everybody should do acid, kind of like let's bring it out to the people. And obviously this was like a grandiose messianic moment of Ginsberg, but at least the story said that the historical account of this moment says this is a moment in which Ginsberg and Leary had a pact between them of bringing psychedelics to the people. So breaking from the exclusivism of LSDs at the time and bringing it to masses. Obviously, it turned into many ways, and criticized it or not. But what I argue that there was a moment which was considered an event and created a strong revolutionary force from it. So events are important for this like emergence of like counter-hegemonic, egalitarian, revolutionary spirit, but it's also hard to maintain them, and persistence is required. You need to find the like-minded people, you need to find people who are aligned with you as an individual. It's hard to change reality, you need to form a collective, so it's not easy, and they can be easily reversed. So the kind of the charisma, as I said, of the revolution can be easily reversed or denied. The revolutionary spirit can be, or the language can be actually appropriated by the structure itself. So if you see now a lot of like how LSD revolutionary language is used for for-profit companies, it's kind of the counterculture language is moved into for-profit companies, and while the counterculture is very much against that, it's the same kind of revolutionary language, but it's not necessarily really revolution in its essence. It might be about the human individuals, but not about changing society. So those who unable to act upon those truths that are revealed to them, and they unable to act upon fidelity, would consider to drop out. I think that dropping out, that is kind of the idea of dropping out, is very much related of like not succeeding to fulfill fidelity, not succeeding in the revolution. So in Israel, most of the kind of ayahuasca scene, and the New Age scene, is always considered, everybody has a plan B of moving to Portugal. Still, many do that. They move to Portugal, they seek this idea of a community in nature that lives in harmony, but they don't seek changing society anymore. They seek to change it in a small scale, create this egalitarian, equal, utopian idea, but in a small scale without changing the structure at large. This is the kind of the dropping out that happens once like you're just tired of being angry or being like trying to change things. So this is kind of also what can happen to fidelity. And fidelity can be also hijacked. So Badiou says that some processes look revolutionary, but they're not necessarily revolutionary. And this is obvious when they're not universal. So it's a revolutionary procedure, but it's about the revolution of a very selective group of people, and it's about them, and it's not about humanity. It's not really revolutionary at large. And a lot of people talk about the psychedelic relationship with what happened in the capital of the States, right? So that kind of the Q shaman and things like this. So that can be, it looks revolutionary. It looks like almost psychedelic and revolutionary in spirit. It brings those like images of revolution to mind, but it's obviously about like white supremacy and there's issues there. So it's like fidelity can look like that, but it's not always like that. It can be changed, hijacked, reframed in many ways. So I was speaking mainly about political events, but there are other types of events that can happen. That can happen in science and art. So the scientist like has joy of the new enlightenment, a new idea, the Eureka moment, the artist with the kind of joy of new perceptual qualities, so seeing the world in different way as an artist, or the lover that with new existential intensity that's like rockster, which changes the whole world, and the political subject that kind of believes in a new idea of equality and bringing equality to all. So these events can happen in those different realms, but regardless of the realms, this kind of using Badiou as a framework also explains how insights and actions can be intertwined together. So an insight a lot of times is seeing things in a new way, but a lot of times seeing things in a new way also means trying to change the old way to the new one. So the moment of insight, the moment of breaking from our normal way of perceiving things has action embedded in it. It has action at an attempt to change reality based on this. So this is a bit different than like a lot of times the unitive experience is associated with acceptance, right? This kind of idea of like everything is good, everything is good as is. If I can accept it, that there's no need to change, there's no need to fight. A lot of time, insight brings actually the action or bringing the resistance, you know. So they actually can ignite people with certain passion towards change. So that's it. I hope I made sense and sparked curiosity and confused you and challenged some assumptions and recharged hope maybe. And I'd like to thank different people that worked with me in this. So supervisor Robin Paris, so been in this lab for 9 years and he's involved in this as well. Antoine Saka, Palestinian activist that helped me brainstorming and helped in the interviews. Maps, Samantha Ginsburg, who also helped in the interviews, and Ray Dublin, who also helped in supervision. Lisa Luan from our lab that helped in qualitative analysis. Iftach Lon from Hebrew University for some mentorship that relates to peace studies and peace research. And Nadim Parkawi, who's a Palestinian anthropologist studying Palestinian counterculture, and he's my main partner in crime in this whole Badiou thing. So I told him the stories I saw, I recognized the rupture of the politics of the oneness, and he said, okay, this is Badiou, go and read it. And I was like reading Badiou for 2 years before I managed to dip my toes into anthropology and philosophy. Thank you. And also, feel free to get questions, but also, if you want, also we have to have time for questions of anything psychedelic. That also background on this.
I really enjoyed the talk. Thanks a lot, the case studies and everything. I was thinking, I mean, I'm coming more from a STS anthropology background rather than Badiou and Event. But I was thinking about responsibility and fidelity. It's one thing about the event that makes you feel responsible. Then the politicizing aspect of your stories, right? I think that Moss was the third case study. He's also politicizing it in a very status quo way, right?
Yeah.
So this, how do you theorize cultural policing in the ritual?
Right, yeah.
Because it sounds to me that there's a little bit of this cultural policing, which is also, I mean, part of the ethnographies, for instance, with indigenous people, that they want to impose harmony.
Yeah.
Harmony means bypassing any sort of conflict, inequality.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in ritual theory. So maybe it's not about you, but
Of course, yeah.
ritual theory is about these revelations and the effects they have.
Yeah.
And how by chants, songs, repetitive acts, you sort of make the space safe for communion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So in ritual theory, there's a lot of like this also tension between preservation of the social structure and changing it. So a lot of times, you know, like the classic theories of comunitas, the experience of anti-structure of quality in the ritual space can sometimes serve the power dynamics outside of the ritual. But then there's more like new theories that that sees the ritual as a place also that can preserve social society and structure, but also in moments shift, you know. So there's like rituals can be a force that change society. different theories around that. So I guess that this dynamic between communitas or moments of shift or harmony and liberation, or conservative and change. Ritual and non-ritual studies discuss those dynamics. The policing that happens in the space that I observed, and I think happens in a lot of neo-shamanic, new age spaces, is happening also kind of like ideology of the space, which is mainly about a oneness and personal. It's very much individualized, is used for the policing. So it's kind of known that if somebody would come and criticize the facilitator, then they would mirror that to the person. What does it mean about you? How does it touches you? What does it reflect you? And that's how the facilitator is always protecting themselves from criticism. So they can kind of use the ideology of the space in order to kind of push away criticism, and in a way police and maintain kind of the structure. Sense. Is that your question?
Yes, no, I mean, I thought that was really interesting what you said about the third case study. I mean, he talks about so many of the things that we are interested in following, right? Like ritual, cultural change in disaster anthropology. You have this event, this disaster, and then surprise, surprise, it changes. People have hope that society is going to change, and after 2-3 years, they go back to status quo, right? So structuralist disaster anthropology, we have a very similar explanation. But one thing that I really thought that was interesting, and maybe we could expand, is the relation between notions of responsibility and fidelity. That's something that I've not heard before, actually. That's maybe because I'm not familiar with you. This notion of the fidelity to this event as if it was unique, rather than performative, right? You can think about an event as not being a unique universal experience, but something that you have to produce each time. So instead of fidelity, you have some sort of commitment to that revelation, and then each time you adapt to the new.
So I guess the one thing is that I think the responsibility or the fidelity comes sometimes by the awareness of the situation of the event. So when person very much believes that they kind of see the event as she sees the event as truth, but does not see that other people, see it the same as her. She feels almost like there's a responsibility to deliver, to bring the message. So the kind of it's almost a missionary in its its process for that person. But the responsibility relates to really to a belief, the confidence in the belief that what they saw relates to reality, relates to injustice, and she just needs to bring the message to others. I think that's the responsibility of accountability. There was another point I wanted to say there. I forgot.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting. I come from a cultural psychology background, and I do work on collective trauma. So it was interesting to have an insight into those experiences and the revelation, because I could see where they fit when we talk about collective trauma and the generational trauma and how to pass on. But I'm curious about one thing. I don't know if it's subversive, but your motivation on doing this research. Was it a revolutionary?
Was it revolutionary?
No, I mean, was it a revolutionary moment from the trips? Because we had lots of accounts from the participants themselves. Just to see what motivated this research, especially that you mentioned the last story of the ex-soldier. You mentioned that you were an ex-soldier, and for him, it's guilt that made him not continue, didn't make it continue. And as a Palestinian, I was really happy to be using the right terminology and explaining the situation in the right way, which is, you said, it's not common for other Israelis to do. So, I just wanted to know about positionality and what motivated this research in the context.
So in the beginning, when I actually wrote the paper, I also ended it with organizing myself as a subject to an event. And Nadine, my partner in this, says this is like too much navel gazing, keep it to your book and edit it out. My process and my event is not necessarily related to Israeli Palestinians, although I can say that once I started working on this, my psychedelic experiences became related to that and became even sometimes revolutionary, or I managed to shift my context, my setting, to be more revolutionary in a way. So I started working with psychedelics and Israelis and Palestinians, also sharing space together with that intention in mind. My experience had more of the revolutionary spirit in them. So kind of really shifted my intention. But what brought me into this was, let's say my structure was neuroscience and psychology and therapy. So very individualized structure, but many of our experiences had this almost both collective experiences, this group, but also had a revolutionary spirit, like, visions which relates to like anti-capitalism, like write a book that I really liked, or just like they have that spirit in them, which I felt was missing from my research. So I realigned myself to do research, and also my experience even as a younger, before I was a scientist, just doing LSD with friends in the desert in Israel. They were collective. They were about collective forces. They were about nature and group and personal, but the social element was always present. So it was the lack of social presence in research, or at least the research that I was surrounded in, not all of psychedelic research, and seeing in ceremonies with some people from Devon, seeing that this is an important part, that I realigned my research to work on this. And in Israeli, I was just like, okay, I need conflict. I want to start the conflict. I need a problem. Let's go for, this is my problem at home. And then it's kind of started to go to this direction.
Thanks for the talk. It's very interesting. I also have, I come from a politics background. I'm actually a citizen of Palestine. So my question is really not going to be, it's more about the context than the actual psychological experience. But I was wondering, first, if you really described the experience of Amos, was his name? You kind of described a vision and an experience that touched on the kind of the immediate violence of the occupation, him as a soldier, and then him sort of seeing himself as a Jew in Europe, and seeing himself
as a Nazi.
As a Nazi, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, himself meaning the Palestinian family that was there. And I was wondering if in other sort of visions or these moments or events by the Israeli participants, whether there was something unsettling about the kind of the settledness of their identity, right? Like, because you also mentioned the kind of relationship to place that Palestinians were experiencing, right? Seeing the land bleed, or seeing, kind of having this very strong connection to the land. And I'd be curious to hear how the Israeli participants would perceive their own attachment to the land.
Yeah, the land played, this is also not necessarily from this analysis, but the land played a big role for many people in Israelis, Palestinians, relationship with the land. It's different for different people. So as I said, I have 4 stories of Palestinian women talking about bleeding land. So that was definitely like something that happened. But for other people, let's say like quite liberal Israeli, who the kind of the left-leaning Israelis, they're very much deny the relation. They don't want to be related to the land, right? Because the connection to land has been like almost appropriated for political reasons by right-wing Israelis. So left-wing Israelis were really like, I don't like nature, I don't want to be connected to the land is like meaningless. Like, this sometimes the thing, you know, like you see a lot of times they're like, people even that go to hike in nature, this has a relation, a kind of a connotation of the army in Israel. So there's a very much detachment from that is left. And that person says, you know, I regained my connection to the land, but more as like a non-Israelism, just Jewish, so not more universal. So people will talk about connection to land, which is not of ownership. So you can connect to the land, but without the need to own the land. So connection beyond ownership. And I can say that I know of other groups that, not the groups that I study, but groups, let's say, of Jewish settlers that drink ayahuasca, they're quite exclusive, and they don't bring Palestinians in those ceremonies. And there, the kind of the Jewish idea of the land of the fathers and the kind of the ownership of the land plays a stronger part, in a non-universal way, in a very Jewish way, because the context is very right-wing Jewish in these ceremonies. Now, this is more, I heard from people who participated in them. I did never study those groups, so I cannot really say that for sure. But in that space, ayahuasca a lot of times enhanced like right-wing ideology. So chosen people, ownership on land, kind of take those, these are spiritual ideas. Connection to land is like, a spiritual idea that a lot of the conflict is about. And it kind of enhanced that in these groups, which are more of settlers.
Can I ask?
Sure.
So would you say that the experience of the ritual, the ayahuasca ritual, tends to sort of amplify the political views that you kind of consciously or subconsciously already hold?
I think of maybe amplify the political views of the person in the context. So once the context starts to be like, because a lot of the experience is relational, or the processes are relational, and you're very much affected by people around you. So I think if you have a very homogeneous group of people who drink ayahuasca together and have the same political ideology, then probably it won't change much. I cannot say for sure, but it probably won't change much. If there are a group of people who challenges each other, then the ideology of people and the space can change, I think.
So thanks a lot for the examples. One thing that I really enjoy about this talk is that you actually explain the examples in length, right? So each case study, you can see the meaning, what's going on, what are the relations. So I started thinking when you were talking about this revolutionary potential about the way in which police psychedelics, from its colonial kind of origins, has always been central, for instance, for Spaniards. They didn't want the Aztecs to have their own visions, right? Because visions are not only about the relations that are personal, but because they always have the potential to be strong. So that's just what I was thinking, how do you relate, or how do you kind of relate to this literature? Maybe you don't know about it, because that's mostly between Spanish and this.
Spanish and trying to disrupt the kind of the practices.
Yes, the whole idea that you can speak with nature and not by yourself.
I think that's like a lot of just a history of a lot of mystical, I guess, or it's not mystical, let's not use the word mystical, but experiential outer states, practices that have strong intense experiences which change people's life. So whether it's some mystical Kabbalah practices or indigenous practices, but there's a lot of times doctrinal religions, or we try to suppress this type of religiosity or spirituality because it can, maybe they're worried, I don't know, but that's at least what they say. They might be worried that it can like break it or change it, It's harder to follow a doctrinal types of religions. So the religions that are by repetition of texts. So like, most of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they're religions that we people acquired religiosity by repeating the same text over and over. So it kind of becomes almost part of their even implicit knowledge of movement. But once you have religiosity that's based on experiences and intense emotions, it doesn't, although conflicts affect them, it's much harder to control them. And so you see in this type of, I don't know if you know the work of Harvey Whitehouse. So he's a cognitive anthropologist. But you see that it's in this type of religiosity, which is more experiential than intense emotional experiences. It's hard, there are many more schisms that are happening. So it's harder to maintain a large doctrine with its hierarchies and stuff, because it will always break from it. So maybe that's, it is kind of having this type of practices within a doctrinal religiosity is kind of risks it. So maybe that's what it's, I don't know.
Yeah. Hello. Yes, thank you very much. My question is related to how ayahuasca came to Israel, because I mean, as far as I understand, there are 3 places of diffusion of ayahuasca. Peruvian Amazon, Iquitos, and the surrounding Tarapoto and all that, Pucallpa. The second one, it will be in Colombia, which, although much more modest, the Yaje phenomenon, Sibundoy Valley, Colombian Amazon. And the third is the Brazil. And it seems to me that this emphasis in the Jewish singing and all that perhaps came from the UDV. I don't know. You know the UDV. In Brazil you have the three: the Santo Daime, the Barquinha, which I studied, and the UDV. And it seems like the UDV, this emphasis on Jewish, Solomon, and it is very strong. I wonder whether it is this kind of tradition that came stronger to Israel than the Amazonian one or the Colombian, probably not the Colombian at all.
Yeah, probably not Colombian. Yeah, mostly Santo Daime was, I think, the first to come to Israel. And then like neo-shamanic practices, but like Peruvian, but that came, through the transaction of tourism. So,
But what about UDV, União do Vegetal?
I'm not sure that UDV is that strong in Israel. I think it was more. So right now, in Israel, there are like 2 camps of ayahuasca. They call themselves those who drink in light and those who drink in darkness. Those in light are kind of like come from Santo Daime, so it's a circle with with songs and singing together. And those who drink in darkness are more like kind of neo-shaman, like come more from Peru. That's at least
I see.
But in reality, it's much more mixed, and in reality, it's much more participatory. So if Santo Daime is everybody singing together the same songs, and the kind of...
And with lights, huh? With lights.
Yeah, and
lights
the darkness is
right.
usually the facilitator sings for the rest. What happens in reality is that most of the practice almost wants to be participatory. I think it happens in many neo-shamanic practices, and also in Australia. So people want to also bring their own music and songs and stuff. So it's like the shaman does its thing, maybe after half this or 2/3, other people bring their own thing, and it's very open and democratic for whatever comes. And I think that creates a certain fluidity in the practice and really changes it quite drastically.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess it's just always thinking. Yeah, that's just the time. Yeah. Thank you again.